Hello, I'm Karen Jenkins Johnson. Jenkins Johnson Projects is celebrating our first anniversary. The space welcomes a rotation of guest curators who present exhibitions of contemporary artists, especially artists of color and emerging artists working across disciplines. We have presented over 35 artists from emerging to established. We are very excited about our current exhibition curated by Larry Ossei-Mensah, On the Road.
So the name of the exhibition is On the Road. It's inspired by a book written by Jack Kerouac. As I read the book, I had questions about where were the people of color? And I was talking to a poet. I was telling him about the project and the idea. And he said the black people were in between the words. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, well, if you think about when Kerouac is writing, jazz is in its heyday. And so jazz, the music, informs the rhythm of the writing. And so for me, I kind of sat with that to think about, thinking about what's happening in between the words, in between the lines. How are artists also thinking about those things? So what happens, or what does that discourse look like when you have three artists who are living in the Midwest and really ask what's happening in Middle America?
I'll say that being in the Midwest has been, kind of defining of me in some ways. My practice is one where I work through drawing, painting, works on paper, sculpture, and now more recently performance. I grew up in very small town, rural Illinois. The main way in which I accessed the outside world was through film or television and learning about life outside the borders of a small town. I think the contrast of traveling abroad and being in other locations in the world, other geographies, it was so heightened because of that experience. A lot of the times I lay out works on paper in front of me and I kind of create and compose the image, the picture from other works. And in the beginning it was always like the translation highlights what is maybe lost in that transaction with language, from one language to another. But I think more recently I've been thinking about what can potentially be gained when you do an act of translation. And in my own practice, that happens when I'm either moving materially from paper to canvas to a shift in scale, formal inquiries in that regard. I think a lot of the forms and things that I'm gathering are just from things I've seen. And so they've kind of gotten translated over time through photographs I look back on, memories that I've had. I feel that those things were abstracted the minute that I tried to retain them in my mind or take a photograph. And so I think this desire to further abstract these things became a natural evolution of my experience in the world.
Art has been a part of me even before I knew what art was. You ask my mom and she's like, yeah, you've been drawing ever since you could hold a pen or since your hand was strong enough to hold a pen or pencil. I make collages, photographs, sculpture. The way that I was arranging it reminded me of my grandmother's quilts. I had never sewn a day in my life. I woke up that day and called a friend of mine to teach me how to use a sewing machine, and it was like my hands already knew how to do it. That was the first time where I really felt this kind of like deep ancestral connection. And once I started quilting, it was like everything in my life opened up. Like my whole life started to change. Like it's like when you find this thing that you've been searching for and you didn't even know what you're feeling around in the dark, you don't know what you're looking for, then you find it and it breaks you open. That's kind of it's like a gift they gave to me that I can keep giving, So it's been in my family for easily over 100 years, generation after generation. Instead of just thinking about abstraction as just abstraction. Like I was looking at it as a way to tell like meaningful stories and like connect people in a place that may never be connected. So you'd have people from parts of the city that would never normally connect, but then you can stand there and be like, oh, this is my so-and-so XY, you know, this is my like husband's old shirt, and this is my, you know, my old thing. And it's like people that never would have met are now connecting in ways, even if they're subtle and even if it's just for a moment. I feel like that can be a spark where it's like, you know, you start to realize how we are all interwoven.
My influences, they're everywhere. You know, everything from music, both contemporary and past things. Thinking about like sexuality, black male sexuality, intimacy. I grew up writing graffiti and being influenced by a lot of graffiti writers. And for me, what graffiti ultimately represented in some of the spaces in which it occupied was a desire to speak above the language. So like within like what you'll see with like the gesture that continuously moves and motivates within the space, I'm referencing the wicked hand style, which was a graffiti hand style that I think originally developed in the mid-'80s. And it was a way to, again, just elevate the language in the way in which we communicated to each other. Vibrating lines and different things like that as I layered color, how colors would bleed through from the back forward. Those are things that I was considering, how the line would break down, all those things. And it's the same thing with language, as in when you try to speak above the language, you know, eventually things start to break down, you know, and you have to find a different route in which to move forward, to move the conversation forward. I specifically wanted to use screen printing, which is a process of, you know, printing for the masses and whatnot. At the same time, I wanted to use a graffiti ink, like an ink that was specifically developed as a product, a tool to like write graffiti. And graffiti in itself is a way of speaking to the masses, because I do not want to contribute to what I look at as a constant construction of race, gender, and patriarchal ideals, moving that forward. Just thinking about how limiting social constructs are, and also trying to think beyond just this carbon-based structure, which I like to call a spacesuit, the body itself, trying to think beyond that and move well beyond those things, which is also why so much of the work is not rectilinear or square or rectangular.
Like the frame is very much a part of the construction of these works. And I think that's a little bit different than an artist building a frame out of necessity to exhibit the work. It's really been an incredible journey working with these artists, and I tried to make an effort to make sure that they were in dialogue with each other, to see how they're responding to each other's work. Because, you know, steel sharpens steel.
I'm definitely interested to learn more about Caroline's work, because it's like I get this like kind of spiritual connection to it.
She is unabashedly committed to abstraction as a way of mark making, as a way of storytelling, as a way of language.
The way in which he has a very strong geometric form, and then within that form allows for chance, happenstance, gesture, a kind of freedom, but it's all kind of contained by these forms. That's something that I think I'm also drawn to do in my practice.
You know, he's, I think, aligned himself in more of an art historical conversation with some of the things he's doing with like textiles and referencing the family and the black body outside of urban environments, which is what we've historically been delineated to. So his work innately puts the black body in an abstract situation.
I was just really taken by it. And, you know, we spent a lot of time just talking about them, you know, formally, conceptually, but then their function as a portrait. You know, for me, I grew up in the South Bronx, first generation Ghanaian American. Did not grow up going to museums. And so for me, that's something I reflect on when I put together an exhibition. Create a sense of belonging, create a space that you feel welcome in.
And also in a space in which, you know that the proprietor of the space is very invested in what they're doing. That it's not necessarily about the economy of art, but more so about the artists themselves and presenting them with a platform to allow the work to succeed.
I really appreciate Larry's eye because it's a pairing that I wouldn't have imagined. Upstairs, that room, it feels like all those pieces belong to each other. Like they feel like a family. Like the outdoor photographs and then like the collages with the floral and the like green and red. It's like they're all a part of the same environment.
Being an artist, it's a lifelong pursuit. As a professor, this is something I have to always remind my students as well. The markers of success are different for everybody.
There are hurdles for artists of all different socially constructed identities, right? And at the same time, I think as opposed to kind of delineating, this is my struggle, this is this person's, this is that person's, really trying, for myself, stepping outside of myself and really trying to identify with the struggle in a collective way.
I want to work with people that I feel comfortable like telling my stories. What I will say is that this feels like extremely important.
People in New York need to see this. It's easy to go find artists and like make a show, right? But it's like, how do you make a show that's thoughtful? We had the luxury, I think, of almost a year to work on this exhibition. So it's a series of conversations, visits. I like to believe that the exhibition is a manifestation of these interactions. This is the beginning of a great dialogue and the continuation of a relationship with all the artists and a continuation of a deepening relationship with Jenkins Johnson Gallery, specifically Jenkins Johnson Project in Brooklyn. So I look forward to you guys joining us and checking out the exhibition.